This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
All right, Patrick, do you just want to jump right in?
Yeah, sure.
No preamble?
Chapter 25, Cairhien, and our symbol is the setting sun. Rising sun?
I think it's the rising sun.
Okay.
Because it's the symbol of Cairhien, so it's the rising sun of Cairhien.
Rising sun.
Also kind of works well with Lord of the Morning.
Yeah. The city of Cairhien lay across hills against the river Alguenya, and Rand's first sight of it came from the hills to the north, by the light of the midday sun. Elricane Tavolin, hoping I'm getting that right, or guessing well enough, and the 50 Cairhienan soldiers still seemed like guards to him, the more since crossing the bridge at Galldrian. They became more stiff the further south they rode, but Loyal and Hurin did not appear to mind, so he tried not to. He studied the city, as large as any he had seen. Fat ships and broad barges filled the river, and tall granaries sprawled along the far bank. But Cairhien seemed to be laid out in a precise grid behind its high, gray walls. Those walls themselves made a perfect square, with one side hard along the river. And just as exact a pattern, towers rose within the walls, soaring as much as 20 times the height of the wall. Yet even from the hills, Rand could see that each one ended in a jagged top.
So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the city really quick.
Yeah.
Obviously, this city was ruled by Laman when he committed Laman's sin and cut down the Tree of Life to create his throne, which started the Aiel War.
And so that was only about 20 years ago now.
So they burned the towers down, and once the king was gone, the city was taken over by Galldrian.
Do we know his house? Is it Karaethon?
I thought that was his last name, so that was his house.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I was guessing.
And then his rival, and the rival family in the city is Demandred, which happens to be Moiraine's name.
Interesting.
So I always think it's funny, this city very much in different circumstances could be ruled over by Queen Moiraine.
Had she not been born with the spark?
There is some evidence that the White Tower was going to try and put her on the throne.
It wouldn't be too difficult to get her there.
It gets fleshed out a little bit in the New Spring.
Isn't she like second or third in line? I think she has some living, like an uncle or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Apparently the reason she was out wandering and ran into land is because they were going to try and put her on the throne once she got the shawl.
This all rings a bell. Yeah, I just haven't read this in so long.
And she probably had to avoid that because she had another mission to find the Dragon Reborn. But I think without Rand, she would have... Basically, if Rand hadn't been born, she wouldn't have had that mission, and she would be the queen of this city. In my opinion.
If it weren't for Rand.
If it weren't for Rand. And of course, the topless towers were burned, and that's why they're not topless anymore and are being built.
I thought they were the topless towers because they never stopped being built.
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
They're not, they were always, but they used to be at least like really tall. Now they're kind of sort of tall. And a lot shorter than they used to be.
I noticed that there's some tension throughout the next couple of chapters. First, because Rand looks like an Aielman, but also that when Rand's talking about the Foregaters, and he's like, where would they go? Why wouldn't they be here?
Most of the nobles look down on the Foregaters as farmers.
A lot of them were, apparently, but were displaced by the Aiel War and have never gone back.
Well, I wouldn't want to live next to the mountains. Like, I'm guessing the Aiel would raid. That's a good question. Do the Aiel raid over the mountains? Or are they just afraid?
I don't think so. I think they're just afraid to go back.
Right.
I'm sure we would know about it if the Aiel were doing raids.
It seems like no Aiel has crossed the spine of the world since the Aiel War ended.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So I just like to contrast this with the Borderlanders who are, facing Trolloc raids on a daily basis and just fortified and fought it versus the Cairhien who are like running away and the potential threat of Aiel.
Although I'm not sure who's scarier, the Trollocs or the Aiel.
Aiel, definitely.
I mean, the Trollocs are afraid of the Aiel, so there's that.
I think that's the point I was trying to make. Yeah, definitely. I would much rather face either single or in a group Trollocs.
Trollocs. At least they're stupid.
Yeah. Although there is a chance that you'll be taken prisoner if you're facing Aiel.
A chance. I mean, I'd rather be an Aiel's prisoner than,
Yeah.
than the Trolloc.
I guess you can be taken prisoner for Trollocs too, but that's more livestock than prisoner.
Not for long.
So because there's no farmers out there, they're complaining that there's just no food, and so they have to constantly import food from outside the country.
To keep the refugees from rioting.
And that's really sapped the resources of the kingdom. It's one of the reasons why the Ogier aren't around anymore. They're not helping with the building of the Topples Towers.
Didn't he stop paying them? Or
Yeah.
something like that?
He did, because he is running out of money.
Yeah. The next thing that I have is Rand smiling and just enjoying gawking at the Foregaters. Kind of partying 24/7.
Mm-hmm. Which is the other reason why he's running out of money, the king, because he's providing just endless parties.
Bread and games.
Yeah. He's trying to keep his people distracted.
Peasants, Tavolin muttered, staring straight ahead in disgust. Look at them. Corrupted by outland ways. They should not be here. Where should they be? Rand asks. The Cairhien officer glared at him and spurred his horse forward, flogging at the crowd with his quirt. Quirt. I'm going to Google that right now. I'm sure it's like a riding crop, but...
That's what I would assume. I was going to say a stick with a little whip on the end of it, but that sounds just like a riding crop to me. Because if he's flogging it...
Quirt is a noun and a verb. You quirt someone with a quirt, just in case anyone was wondering. But it's a short-handled riding whip with a braided leather lash. Rand asks if they're having a festival, and Loyal says they are every day.
Yeah, just this constant festival, which is actually kind of leads to the encounter with the Illuminators.
Yeah.
Later, because they built a chapter house.
And this is also where Loyal says that Elder Hammond says Galldrian is a disgrace.
But yeah, Aludra is currently here in the city. She's the one who's inventing fireworks, and the only reason that she ends up, again, Rand in severe nature, blows up the illuminating chapter house, which sends her off to be just caught up in Matt's Taviran net and leads to cannons.
Yeah. Where she's inventing, like, tubes to launch them from, right? Or
Right.
something like that.
Well, she's drawing up all the plans, and she's getting her matches ready, and she ends up on the run. I noticed the contrast of the city kind of reflects the contrast of the Cairhien people themselves.
Yeah.
It's like all straight lines on the inside, but then there's this like crazy outside to them occasionally.
Cairhien proper was a sharp contrast to the chaotic bustle of the Foregate.
That was
Its
exactly the quote. Yep.
Its roads are like intersect at right angles, and it's all clean and terraced, and
He says they like carved away the hills so that they wouldn't have to like curve any lines or anything like that.
it's very Roman, it seems to me.
And in a lot of ways, it reminds me a little bit of the Borderlanders, where they talk about the beauty of the well-placed line. But this seems to be more the well-placed grid.
Yeah.
Like, they have to make everything exactly right.
The topless towers of Cairhien, Loyal murmured sadly. Well, they were tall enough to warrant the name, once. When the Aiel took Cairhien, about the time that you were born, the towers burned and cracked and fell. He also notes that the Ogier don't like working for the Cairhien because they didn't want their work done without any embellishment.
And we've seen their work, like in Tarvalin, looks like nature. That's what they want to do, is they're emulating their wonderful trees.
And what the Cairhien want seems to be right angles and flat plains.
Again, very Roman, as you were saying before.
Yeah.
Spartan, even.
There's this little interaction when the party gets to the gate. They're still with the Cairhien officer. Both officers looked from Rand to the chest, hidden by a Loyal striped blanket, and back again. Neither asked what was under the blanket. Tavolin had looked at it often, on the way from Tremenson, but he had never asked either. The balding man looked at Rand's sword, too, and pursed his lips for an instant. I'm not sure what is happening there.
I mean, I think it's just one of the many drips and drops that gets Rand involved in the game of houses. His encounter with the statue, his encounter with the, I want to say general, but that's not right, the captain.
Yeah.
The fact that he's hiding the contents of his box.
Which an Ogier is carrying?
Which is very odd.
He's an Ogier servant,
Right.
is the way they're going to see it, which is crazy. That doesn't happen.
The fact that he's asking after Selene,
Yeah.
who is a mysterious woman that nobody knows. There's just so many mysteries. The fact that he looks like an Aiel, the fact that he's carrying a heron-marked sword, the fact that he's an Andorran prince. All of these things add up to a bunch of Cairhien drawing their own conclusions.
That he keeps denying being a lord, and they say, when you find an inn, like, and the implication is in the proper district, like, come tell us where you're staying. And Rand looks back out to, like, the crazy Foregate, and he's like, oh, what about if I stay over there? Mm-hmm. Looks fun.
Again, he's obviously out of place on so many levels.
And Hurin stops him right in front of everyone.
No one can imagine what his actual story is, so they make up all sorts of stories about him.
I think that's all that's really happening.
And so when, all these people are giving him sharp looks, and a lot of it, I think, is because he looks Aiel.
Yeah.
Especially when he walks into the tavern.
Oh, that's real. Yeah, that's pretty obvious there. I noticed Rand says as he's walking through the city that the people are, nearly ostentatious about minding their own business. Just like flamboyantly discreet is what that means, basically.
Yeah, just nose down. But everyone's watching each other. They're just looking like they're not.
Yeah.
Also, Rand is notoriously tall. The people of Cairhien are notoriously short. So with his red hair, him walking down the street is visible from like a mile away.
I hadn't really thought of that.
So even everyone who's not, quote unquote, watching him, I'm sure is keeping an eye on him.
And of course, Rand stops at this inn called the Defender of the Dragon Wall, where there's one of a Cairhien soldier killing a guy with red hair.
On the sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, obviously an Aielman.
Right.
Yeah. So, if there's one place that's going to be prejudiced against Aiel, it's the place with,
that was burned to the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, this thing about people's imagination running wild is reminding me of, is it Julian Sandar later when he's about to interrogate someone and he says, like, get me a bucket of cooking oil, 2 mice, and some salt. And the person they're going to interrogate just gives up. He's like, well, what were you going to do with the oil and the mice? And he's like, I don't know. Nothing. It just made him imagine what I would do with some oil and some mice.
I remember that's one of those things when I was a kid that I used a couple of times.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, where I'd be like, where you joking around and be like, I'll get that information out of you. And I just name 3 random things. People will be like, what are you going to do with those? I'd be like, you'll find out. You'll find out. But that's one of those scenes that stuck with me because it's really memorable. I don't know why I love that scene so much, but like
it's really clever.
And I can see in Discord everyone else is really like, that's such a cool scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one, and then the other scene that always really stuck with me, the torture scene, was in George R.R. Martin, where they take the rats and put them in the bucket and light the one end on fire, build a little fire on one end, and the bucket's against your stomach. So the rats eat through your stomach.
Oh, is that in... Oh, that's right. That's in A Song of Ice and Fire?
Yeah, I think so.
It's in 1984 or something really similar, isn't it? Like a starving rat.
Oh, and in Sword of Truth? Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So apparently, yeah.
Oh, Aradia's saying this is something that actually happened.
Okay, so it's an ancient torture technique, and it's just being used by a bunch of other fantasy literature. Oh, that's horrifying. I didn't know it was a real thing. I'm now horrified.
It doesn't surprise me that much.
But that's sort of what I think about when Julian Sandar does that scene is he going to like force the rats to somehow eat through people?
That was what I thought when I read it, but
all right, back to this chapter.
Rand walks into a bar. Sorry. I apologize to everyone for that.
Rand walks into a bar, loyal ducks.
The innkeeper took in Rand's coat and his sword, and his oily smile came back. He bowed, washing his smooth hands. Forgive me, my lord. It was just for that moment I took you for... Forgive me. My brain is not what it was. You wish your rooms, my lord? That's the moment when the innkeeper kind of freaks out because he sees Rand and then sees he has a sword and a lord's coat. And he's like, oh, well, I guess you're just Andor and nobility, because they're the only other redheads around, right?
Yeah, but they tend to have more of a golden hair rather than red hair.
Gotcha.
So I always imagine that Rand has like a much more deep red as opposed to the sort of blondish red or golden red.
Oh, I have a theory that's part of why when Rand says, I'm not a lord, but I'm a shepherd from Andor, nobody believes him. Not just because of the clothing, but also he looks like the Andoran nobility. And he, is related to them. So there's that also.
Technically, he is the son of an Andoran queen.
Yeah. Next thing I have is Loyal saying he doesn't really want to leave the inn because there may be Ogier stonemasons around.
Because they're near his hometown, his homesteading.
Yeah. Rand often forgot that Loyal had run away from home, in effect, to see the world.
Teenager running away from home.
So no one will go to the Foregate with Rand. Because Hurin says it just smells like stabbings, and he doesn't want to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a violent place, and it's stinky.
Yeah.
It's like, when you smell violence, going into any bad part of a city is going to be not great. And so he comes back down from the rooms, and the innkeeper hands him 3 letters, 3 invitations.
3 sealed parchments lay on a tray. What are these? Rand asks. Quail, the innkeeper, bowed again. Invitations, of course, my lord. From 3 of the noble houses. He bowed himself away. I noticed, by the way, that the innkeeper's a minor lord. He's got 1 stripe.
I didn't notice that. And I guess they're not judging Rand by the stripes because he's an Andoran lord.
So it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Who would know I was here? Rand asks. Everyone by now, Lord Rand, Hurin said quietly. The guards at the gate would not keep their mouths closed about an outland lord coming to Cairhien. The hostler, the innkeeper, everybody tells what they know, where they think it will do them the most good, my lord. With a grimace, Rand took 2 steps and hurled the invitations into the fire. They caught immediately. I am not playing Daes Da'mar, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Not even Quail looked at him. I've nothing to do with the great game. I'm just here to wait for some friends. Hurin caught his arm. Please, Lord Rand. Please don't do that again.
I imagine Rand walking into the common room. Don't think of a pink elephant.
Yeah.
Of course everyone thinks the opposite. Like, I'm not playing the game. Of course he is.
So you're not playing, I see.
But this is Ta'Veren grabbing a hold of Rand and just shaking him, right? Like,
yeah.
He is trying to do everything he can to avoid it, and he is caught like fly in the web of Ta'Veren-ness right here.
He's cursing Moraine in his head. She had started it all, stealing his coats and giving him his lord's clothes instead.
Okay, but how hard is it to change it to, like, in the Foregate, get rid of your coat and trade it for like a shitty
right. Buy a new coat, you dummy.
Yeah. Just trade it. Just trade it. You can get. I think the girls do it later where they trade like one dress for like 5 or 6 lesser. They trade like silk dresses for wools.
Oh, I think I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they look
Rand could
regular.
do that in a heartbeat.
He just doesn't. I mean, does Rand still have his boots? Or did those get thrown away?
I think he got new ones fitted to him in Faldara. I remember him saying they felt like he'd broken them in for like a month and he wasn't sure if it was Aes Sedai work or just a good cobbler.
Oh.
And we assumed it was a good cobbler. So he got new boots then, but I think he's had the same ones since. And so Hurin tells him, yeah, you just stepped in it.
Yeah, you just made everyone sure that you're playing.
And tells him, don't burn them anymore. Even if you decline them, just don't burn them. That's like, you're going to piss people off if you burn them.
Yeah. It's essentially implying that, like, yeah, someone will knife you. You can't do that. You're insulting people. Rand storms out of the inn. Decides to go wander around the Foregate.
Sort of runs into just a mummer's show with some puppets. Trollocs that don't look anything like Trollocs because everyone here thinks they're myths.
Yeah. And he goes by a couple of, like, what looks like amphitheaters?
Yeah. I was thinking like the Globe Theater, Shakespeare style.
Yeah.
Because what we're encountering here for the first time is the creation of theater.
Right.
As opposed to just having a narrator tell stories. They're actually having actors play individual characters.
It's kind of
stage.
a funny thing, but in this universe, theater doesn't exist yet, or not in the form that we really understand it. Even we see Thom in the next chapter saying to Denna, like, get this. They're doing this thing where they have people pretend to be the characters. He's like, it's a terrible idea. Like, old-fashioned storytelling is much
of course,
more accurate.
The Gleeman thinks it's a terrible idea. But I think that modern theater went through a transition. Well, perhaps not modern theater, but Greek theater went through a transition much like this. Greek and Roman theater, where it went from folks like Plato and Socrates and Homer telling epic stories verbally. They were the Gleeman of their times. And then as that evolved, they created actors and stories.
Some people think that some of the ancient histories were actually they were for entertainment.
I 100% believe that.
Which is why some of them are really colorful in their description of battles and things. Because it was news, but it was also entertainment.
Mm-hmm. And that hasn't changed really at all.
No, it's just gotten more sophisticated.
But it's also why you have a lot of like symbolic numbers, things like 40 nights and 40 days, and 300 men battled the Persians, things like that.
Yeah.
They're all they're not actual numbers. There's some symbols. The numbers themselves are symbols.
All stories revolve around sex and violence.
And fade to myth.
Just like the 10 p.m. news. Even myths are long forgotten when the 10 p.m. news comes again. Rand's going by one of these theaters and he hears Thom's voice.
I also noticed there were some magicians.
Oh, yeah. In like the theater next to the one Thom is in, there's a Aes Sedai, air quotes.
Illusionist, if you want to get technical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pulling doves out of a hat. So he hears Thom's voice and heads into... What inn is this?
I don't think it's an inn. I think it's like he has to pay to get in. Rand just describes them as big structures, but it looks like they're like outdoor, maybe roofed, but like kind of an outdoor thing. He glanced into one of the large windowless buildings, stopping to look through the door. To his surprise, it seemed to be one huge room, open to the sky in the middle, and lined with balconies, and a large dais at one end. He had never seen or heard of anything like it. People jammed the balconies and the floor, watching people perform on the dais.
Well, I guess they did say a lot of these buildings in the Foregate, they're all made out of wood, and a lot of them are new and cheaply made. So I think that's why it's just this windowless building made out of wood.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
There's not much to it. It's just...
It almost looks like a pen, just so like you have to pay to get in.
Right. And almost a temporary structure. Although they say some of them are like 7 stories tall and like wobbly as people walk in and out. And seem pretty blasé about it. Let's just say there's no building structure codes in Cairhien. Let's hope it's not a geologically active place, or else there's going to be a lot of death in the Foregate.
Rand whispers Thom's name when he sees him. Holding Rand's eye, Thom Merrilin nodded slightly toward a small door beside the dais. Then he was bowing again, smiling and basking in the applause. He's just finished one of the tellings of the Great Hunt.
I feel like this is one of 2 times that our main characters encounter Thom randomly in an inn. Doesn't Matt encounter him later when he's like super drunk?
I think that's right.
Yeah, it's in Tar Valon, that's right.
The lucky night.
Oh, that's right. I guess it is lucky that he encounters Thom. That's definitely a win.
Rand goes over to where Thom signals him to, and Thom appeared on the steps, limping as though his right leg did not bend as well as it had. And he complains about having to tell the Great Hunt for the Horn over and over, and wishes he could tell the Karaethon cycle, or Karaethon cycle.
Yeah, well, maybe not that, but anything else. Anything other than the Horn, the Great Hunt for the Horn, because the Great Hunt is, well, since it's been called, that's all anyone wants to hear.
I'd pay myself to tell something else, he says.
Rand asks, why didn't you go to Ilion to play it? Because you would have made a ton of money doing it there.
Thom notes that Rand's doing really well.
So yeah, just a couple of quotes. He says, that fade had no interest in me. It left me a little present of a stiff leg and ran off after you and Matt. I just like to point out that, like, the fact that Thom took on a fade, even a fade who wasn't particularly interested in him, interested in him and walked away without being dead is a feat of major badassery.
Yeah.
And he glosses over it like, oh, he left me with a limp, but he wasn't that interested.
And the power wrought knives that he had. Think about that sometimes.
Right.
Remember we decided had to have been power wrought?
And then I there's a little bit of Thom's interest in Moraine here when Moraine says, oh,
yeah.
Moraine said you were still alive. And
he paused, looking thoughtful. Moraine said I was still alive, did she? Is she with you then? Rand shook his head. To his surprise, Thom seemed disappointed. Too bad, in a way. She's a fine woman. If she is... He left it unsaid.
Even if she is an Aes Sedai.
So it was Matter Perrin she was after. I won't ask which. They were good boys, and I don't want to know. Rand shifted uneasily. That made me wonder if Thom's doing that to see if Rand shifts uneasily.
Maybe.
Wild speculation, but...
Yeah, I think he's just coming to a conclusion that... Because Rand says, no, Moraine's left me alone. So Thom says, oh, she must not be interested in you. Therefore, you're not the channeler.
Yeah.
However, it's a bit of a false conclusion because Moraine has not left him alone. I mean, because she's given him the jacket and sort of set him up to go on this quest. Just because she's not there with him doesn't mean she's not steering his path.
Right. Yeah, I just kind of want to believe Thom already knows that. Or Thom would see that, but that's not necessarily true. But that's my headcanon, that Thom knows everything all the time.
Right. I think based on the facts he's given, he doesn't necessarily know that. But when we see him, we do see him look at the coat a little bit and quote these prophecies. And I think maybe he comes to that conclusion. Thom asks for his flute and harp.
What I do want to know is, do you still have my harp and flute? I want them back, boy. I have them. I'll bring them, Rand says.
Which, in and of itself, considering all he's been through, is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Since they parted ways. That he held on to the flute and harp through all of that.
In the next chapter, I noticed, I think Thom has maybe a bit of a look of approval. We'll get there in a bit, but maybe a look of approval when he realizes that the cases are still wrapped in his cloak, like it's all intact. He's carried it all this way.
Yeah.
That's like, I mean, geez. If I thought the guy was dead and I was like worried about eating, I'd have sold that harp so fast. Like when it's faced with starvation,
right?
But he never did it. They
Nope.
never do it.
Nope. I mean, and the flute's useful to him.
The flute, yeah, but
the harp has
is
been
just
dead weight the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, and you've done enough hiking to know, like,
Carry that useless thing around.
how much do you think a harp
Not even use
weighs? Anybody know?
I have no idea, but it's a
Pounds.
Yes. Right? Like I figure it would be like carrying a guitar or something, or even heavier. I don't know how a harp is made, really. I think I've only seen one in real life once or twice.
But when you're having a hard time getting enough calories, you're on the road, you're walking the whole time, any weight is going to be a huge amount. I think was saying close to 15 pounds.
Sounds right to me.
I mean, so how much weight did you generally carry on the trail? 30? 60?
It depends on different factors, but I think fully loaded down on the longest stretches, like food and water, I was probably like 40 or 50 pounds, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like, we were going through a really remote area, and we had to make it like 10 days or something. So you're carrying that much food, yeah.
So, I mean, you consider that's...
some water. It was actually a blessing that it was covered in snow that was melting all the time, so we didn't really have to carry water.
Yeah.
Much, but 10 days of food is a lot. A couple pounds per day.
And I'm guessing they really didn't carry any food with them. And no change of clothes or anything like that. And
yeah, they have
no
nothing.
tent or anything. But he also had his bow on him, which was, big. He had a sword on him the whole time.
That would be obnoxious to walk with.
Yeah. I mean...
Does he have a proper belt? I'm sure he has a proper sword belt now. But a sword belt is like different from a regular belt.
Tam gave him a sword belt.
Oh, yeah?
He strapped it on. Because there's something about him strapping it on for the first time and how it feels weird.
Oh, it's not referenced very much, I don't think.
No.
The belt.
No. But the hilt is attached to the belt. And so the chapter ends with Thom heading back out to finish up his set and telling him to come to the bunch of grapes and don't forget to bring the harp and flute.
You come to the bunch of grapes, just beyond the Jangai Gate. I have a room there. Anyone can tell you where to find it. I'll be there in another hour or so. One more tale will have to satisfy them. He started back to the steps, flinging over his shoulder, and bring my harp and flute. Tom's so cool. Nonchalant all the time.
Well, I mean, he knows his stuff, you know? He's the ultimate in self-confidence. Patrick, we're starting on chapter 26, which picks up right where we left off on chapter 25.
Chapter 26, Discord, and our symbol is the harp.
Obviously representing Thom.
Rand darted through the common room of the defender of the Dragon Wall and hurried upstairs, grinning at the startled look the innkeeper had given him. Rand wanted to grin at everything. Tom's alive, he thinks. He flung open the door to his room and went straight to the wardrobe. Loyal and Hurin put their heads in from the other room, both in their shirt sleeves and with pipes in their teeth, trailing thin streams of smoke. Has something happened, Lord Rand? Hurin asked anxiously. Rand slung the bundle made from Tom's cloak on his shoulder. The best thing that could, next to Ingtar coming. Thom Merrilin's alive, and he's here, in Cairhien. He's happy to go meet up with Thom, give him his harp and flute back. Rand manages to get Loyal to leave the inn, while Loyal's saying things like, perhaps I can find an abandoned steading to stay in until then, and he means until he's as old as Elder Hammond.
He's really paranoid about getting taken back home and having to marry and being in trouble. Yeah. Basically being grounded. Rand offers to let him stay in Emmons Field, which wouldn't work because it's not a steading. I don't really get why he offered. It's like, seems the most obvious thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't really get it. But he's also not thinking.
Right.
I mean, like,
I thought there was a steading near Manetheren. And we know there are a couple up in the mountains of Mist, I thought. So he wouldn't be too far away from it. But it would be hard. He'd have to live in the steading. He couldn't live in the Two Rivers.
Yeah. I don't know what the nearest steading is. There's a waygate.
But the waygates were
I don't think it's in a
outside
steading.
the groves.
It's in a grove, yeah.
And Loyal is about to explain, and Rand just interrupts him. He's like, anyway, we're going to go see Thom.
Yeah, you're coming.
You're coming.
And with Loyal in tow, I'd noticed that Rand winks at the innkeeper and laughs as he's leaving.
So I was listing all the things that Rand does to make the Lord suspicious of him and make him think he's playing the great game. There's another one.
Winking?
Just running out of the inn with an ogier at his heels, winking at the innkeeper. Like, of course the innkeeper is going to, respond and report that to his superiors, and that's going to spread around, and they're going to read into it way too much, because they read into everything way too much.
Let him think I'm off to play his bloody great game. Let him think what he wants.
Yeah, that comes back to bite him. He touched his nose on his way out. That has to mean something. That's how the game of houses works. They read into everything.
Rand quickly finds, what is it called? The bunch of grapes or something like
grapes. That? I noticed we have a skinny innkeeper here.
Oh, I didn't catch that. She was not Cairhienin by her dark skin and speech. Thom Merrilin? Aye. He has a room. She says aye. Does that mean she's Ilian?
I actually thought she might be, and I don't have much to go, but one of the sea folk.
Wouldn't she have to have done something terrible to be punished with a life on?
Possibly. And honestly, you think they'd mention the earring holes. She's got dark skin and she says I. So she's, I was thinking she's got some sea in her.
Oh yeah, maybe. I forget who says I, but people say that. Well, whatever.
But she is an old friend of Tom's, so we trust her a little bit.
Yeah. Top of the stairs, first door on the right. Likely Denna will let you wait for him there. She eyed Rand's red coat, with its herons on the high collar, and golden brambles embroidered up the sleeves, and a sword. My lord, she adds.
Well, that's everyone assumes. You got a nice coat, sword, boots.
Yeah, except Denna. It's like, there's an ogier and a boy here to see you later. She's either being funny or like purposely misunderstanding, or she totally understands what's happening.
I think she's
one or the other.
I think she's making fun of him a little bit.
Probably.
You know, Thom and Deanna, I assume, have a clever wit about them and a bit of a. He likes to make fun of them a little bit. So,
but they go up. Deanna lets him in. She says, "What do you want?" It's not even an exaggeration, and she believes them when he says that he came to give Thom his instruments back. Thom always moans about losing the best flute and the best harp he ever had. You would think he was a court bard the way he carries on. You would think he was a court bard.
He was a court bard. Yeah. Sorry, I'm
okay.
I'm not pointing out even the most obvious things. Just like, yeah, of course, yeah, he was a court bard. It's funny that she doesn't know that though.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there could be any number of things going on there. She might not know, or she might know and know not to say anything, or.
But then she wouldn't make a joke about it.
Probably not.
So, I mean, I think Tom's he's a gleeman, and that's all he claims to be.
Yeah.
Even though he wants to make her a bard, or a court bard to a lord and lady.
Mm-hmm. Are you Tom's apprentice? Rand asks. Denna gave a small smile. You might say that. She had resumed her juggling, and her eyes were on the whirling balls. I've never heard of a woman gleeman, Loyal said. I will be the first, she declares.
And she's got the potential. And with Thom as her mentor, she's definitely could go a long way.
Yeah. And Thom thinks she's great.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed that they're pretty much settled into this room. It's like, yeah, we're going to move on soon.
They just live there.
They just live there. Tom's having a little bit of happiness. He's sort of settling down. Not settling down, but settling in a little bit to a life where maybe instead of just being a wandering bard, he would be a mentor to a court bard. And sort of find some stability in his life again.
Have an attractive young girlfriend.
Well, that doesn't hurt.
It's kind of got to be part of the bonus. I mean, he walks in here, and Denna drops the ball she's juggling and jumps on him, and they have a long enough makeout session that Rand feels awkward. Although that doesn't really imply that it has to be very long. Everything makes Rand feel awkward.
Yeah, Thom doesn't do too bad with the ladies.
No, of course not.
You know that running joke where Matt and Perrin and Rand are always thinking, I wish the other one was here because he knows what he's doing with the women. They should replace all of that with Thom. I wish Thom was here. He knows what he's doing with women because he does. I mean, he knows how to manipulate people into getting what he wants and making them think what he wants about them, and he knows how they're feeling and understands their feelings. Plus, he can serenade them or...
Thom, we have visitors. Loyal, son of Arent, son of Halan. Oh, and a boy who calls himself Rand al'Thor.
There's that boy.
Thom looked over her head at Rand, frowning. Leave us for a while, Denna. Here. He pressed some silver coins into her hand. Your knives are ready. Why don't you go pay Ivan for them? He brushed her smooth cheek with a gnarled knuckle. Gnarled. Go on, I'll make it up to you. She gave him a dark look, but she tossed her cloak over her shoulders, muttering, Ivan better have the balance right.
Do you think she's killed with those knives?
No way to say. But I mean, she can throw them accurately.
Yeah. Just headcanon that...
Lots of people throwing knives in this series.
Her throat was slit. I sort of think that maybe someone took her knives and used her own knives on her.
Yeah, did they find anyone else's blood in the room? Or
No.
I mean, they just
I think she's
went in while
asleep.
she's sleeping.
Yeah. But I think it would make it particularly ironic if she was killed with the knives that Thom had bought for her. Keep an eye out for that.
I did notice Thom says she plays the flute better. She played the flute better the first time she picked it up than you ever did.
Well, I mean, Thom hasn't heard him play in a long time.
Yeah, but he just says shit like that all the time. I think it's funny.
But yeah, that's sort of a deep cut.
And when he looks at his instruments, he's like, "You didn't touch the harp, did you? Good."
In your book, where it says, I didn't touch it, Rand assured him, what's the next sentence after that?
Thom plucked 2 strings, wincing. At least you weren't fool enough to try keeping it tuned, he muttered. Could have ruined it.
Okay, so that's not the original sentence.
Oh, really?
No.
What is it?
The original sentence is, but you could have at least kept it in tune for me.
Huh?
So, what happened is, in the original series, Robert Jordan wrote this with Thom saying, hey, Thom basically says he plucks it and it makes an off noise, and he goes, "At least you could have kept it in tune for me."
Yeah.
But then a bunch of people wrote in and said, if you kept it in tune the whole time, it would have totally ruined it and destroyed it. You don't keep a harp in tune unless you're going to play it, and Rand wasn't playing it. So he rewrote that sentence to make it sound like Thom winced, at least you weren't fool enough to try and keep it tuned. So that sentence actually is two different versions depending on which version of the book you have. And I believe the audiobook has the original.
Oh, cool.
So that's just one of those sentences.
I would never have picked that up.
But I remember the controversy over it.
Oh.
Yeah. But it was definitely changed in one of the revisions. Everyone in Discord is like freaking out over which version they have. But it's just it would have been so out of character for Thom to say like you should have kept it tuned, because he would have
would have sounded like you should have tried to learn how to play it even though I told you not to.
And
what that would have come off as to me.
And he wouldn't have understood like how do you take care of a guitar. Of course Thom knows how you take care of a guitar.
Yeah.
Or a harp. And so it would have made Thom sound like he doesn't understand instruments, which is obviously not the case. So it got revised.
Interesting. Rand leaned across the table toward him. Thom, you wanted to go to Ilion to see the great hunt set out and be one of the first to make new stories about it, but you couldn't. What would you say if I told you could still be a part of it? A big part. Loyal stirred uneasily. Rand, are you sure? Rand waved him to silence, his eyes on Thom. That would depend on what part and how. If you've reason to believe one of the hunters is coming this way. But skipping ahead, it doesn't matter if the hunt has left Ilion or not. Rand heard Loyal's breath catch. Thom, we have the Horn of Valir. For a moment, there was dead silence. Thom broke it with a great guffaw of laughter. You two have the horn. A shepherd and a beardless Ogier have the horn of... He doubled over, pounding his knee. The Horn of Valir. But we do have it, Loyal said seriously. And I'm skipping ahead a bit, but I could take you to 3 men who will sell you the horn.
Yeah, he's like, no way. Beardless. I love the beardless.
How much did you pay for it? We'll talk to him.
And so he goes off for a while, and then Rand says quietly, Moraine says it's the horn. And that shuts him up instantly.
Thom's mirth was cut short. She does she? I thought you said she was not with you. She isn't, Thom. I have not seen her since I left Valdara and Shinar, and for a month before that she said no more than 2 words to me. He could not keep the bitterness out of his voice.
She's playing you, Rand.
Well, at least you have sense enough to keep it secret. Rand tells Thom his plan.
As Thom says, he's like, at least you have sense enough to keep it secret right after he told Thom.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of an ironic statement. It's like, at least you have enough sense to keep it secret. I can see him just rolling his eyes.
Oh, does it say anything like that?
I don't think it makes it obvious that it's sarcasm, but I imagine that's said in a very sarcastic way. He definitely didn't tell anyone who wasn't Thom. So, I mean, he's been a decent job of keeping it a secret, but he is telling Thom, which he really I think Thom's like, you really shouldn't be telling me that. And I also imagine Thom as like permanently talking in sarcasm.
Rand tells Thom his plan. And Thom says, why Shinar? The legends all tie the horn to Ilion. Rand looked at Loyal. Ogier's ears were sagging. Shinar, because I know who to give it to there. And there are Trollocs and Dark Friends after us. Why does that not surprise me? No, I may be an old fool, but I will be an old fool in my own way. You take the glory, boy. Thom, no. There was a silence, broken only by the creaking of the bed as Loyal shifted. And he sends Loyal away because he wants to talk to Thom more.
He wants to talk to him specifically about being the Dragon Reborn.
He asks Thom about the Karaethon cycle.
Yeah. Thom seems to be a little obtuse here. Like, Rand's giving it away that he's Dragon Reborn, but Thom just seems to not want to accept that as fact. He's like, he can't even consider that as an option. I think he's got a little bit of a spot of blindness. It's just funny to see Rand trying to be sneaky around Thom and just doing a terrible, terrible job of it.
And Thom goes on about the different translations, but he's looking at Rand and he quotes the twice and twice shall he be marked, twice to live and twice to die. Once the heron to set his path, twice the heron to name him true. Once the dragon for remembrance lost, twice the dragon for the price he must pay. He reached out and touched the herons embroidered on Rand's high collar. For a moment, Rand could only gape at him, and when he could speak, his voice was unsteady. The sword makes 5, hilt, scabbard, and blade. He turned his hand down on the table, hiding the brand on his palm. For the first time since Celine's salve had done its work, he could feel it. Not hurting, but he knew it was there. So they do, Thom barked a laugh. There's another one comes to mind.
So I just think it was interesting that Thom is pointing that out. That
got a lot of herons on you, boy.
Yeah. Moraine gave you that jacket, did she? You say she's not with you. That's where I think he's noticing. He's sort of starting to get the idea that Rand may be something more than. I mean, first of all, he's got the horn, and second of all, he's got the herons from the Karaethon cycle on his jacket.
But then he quotes the second part. I'm not sure why. I'll read it really quick. Twice dawns the day when his blood is shed, once for mourning, once for birth. Red on black, the dragon's blood stains the rock of Shale Ghoul. In the pit of doom shall his blood free men from the shadow. Rand shook his head, denying, but Thom seemed not to notice.
So I assume that just comes to mind because it starts with the same twice dawns the day, and the other one starts with twice and twice shall he be marked. That's why I assume he thinks of it.
Oh, but he was talking about how a lot of it doesn't seem to make any sense. And he was like, here are 2 examples of things that don't seem to make much sense.
I liked Enigma's point that he's I think he's warning Rand, basically saying, if you think Moraine is marking you to be the dragon, that is not a good thing. You know, it's you are going to end up with your blood on the rocks of Shale Ghoul.
Don't be the dragon, Rand.
Yeah, not a good idea. And of course, we know this prophecy, twice dawns the day, that's a solar eclipse that happens during the last battle. Once for mourning. There's the death of Rand.
And the stone won't fall until Kalandor is wielded.
Which is, the events of the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah.
Thom is at least warning Rand, like, hey, you don't want to go along with the plots of the Aes Sedai, because they'll have you die in some random land to try and prove these stupid prophecies.
Yeah.
And Rand's replying, listen, don't worry about it. There are no Aes Sedai using me. I haven't seen Moraine. She could tell me I can go wherever I want, and I left.
And there's no Aes Sedai with you now. None at all.
Mm-hmm.
He seems like he almost doesn't believe it.
Yeah, well, he's trying to put some things together. It's like, he really does think that Rand is a male channeler, but he thinks that there's no way they would he says it at the end of this chapter, if he was a male channeler, there's no way they'd let him go. So he sort of has these 2 conflicting facts in his head, and he can't figure out why would they let him go. He's not really realizing that they would let the Dragon Reborn go. That's so outside of like the concept. Of course, the Aes Sedai wouldn't let the Dragon Reborn go. He's a male channeler. They'd still him.
Most would.
And he asks, like, well, if you're not the dragon, then why send the Ogier out? Why are you asking me all these questions? And Rand comes up with some half-baked excuse.
Thom probably doesn't believe him. But then they start talking about Owen.
Mm-hmm. I noticed Rand shared the idea that the heroes will come for whoever blows the horn, even a dark friend.
Yeah.
Which is an idea that Moraine shares with him, and we know that that's incorrect.
Right.
We'll later hear from Ardor Hawkwing. But yeah, so he starts talking about Owen, and he's, basically saying, for a time I thought that I knew why she wanted you, and I thought I knew why. It's because you could channel.
Yeah.
And I thought she wanted to use you. And that's really the only reason I got involved, is I wanted to keep you away from the Aes Sedai. And they have a pretty candid conversation here about male channelers and going mad and dying. We get a lot of information here about what happened to Thom and Owen that made Thom so angry. He straight out says Owen was a channeler. He was stilled. They didn't give him a chance.
Right. He didn't use the power unless he had to, and then only to help his village. But I suppose there were no choice. Thom throws up his hands. The people where he lived told me he was acting strange the whole last year.
And it kind of gives us a timeline on how long we can expect Rand to last, because he lasts like 2 to 3 years, basically, before he goes mad.
Yeah, that seems about right.
Yeah. And I know not everyone's consistent, but this sort of, to me, was always sort of Robert Jordan setting the timeline of how long Rand had.
Yeah, it seems to vary. Rand goes on trying to convince Thom to help them. Other gleemen might tell tales about it, but you could say you've had it in your hands. He realized he sounded like Celine, but all that did was make him wonder where she was. There's nobody I'd rather have with us than you, Thom. Thom frowned as if considering it, but in the end he shook his head firmly. Boy, I like you well enough. Oh, you mentioned this earlier. But you know as well as I do, I only helped because there was an Aes Sedai mixed in it.
So Thom's saying, hey, I like my life. I don't want to go chased off by Trollocs and dark friends. That was crappy. See this limp? It didn't go well last time. I don't want to do it again.
Then he gives Rand his second best flute. You might need to earn your supper again someday, boy. I might at that, Rand said. At least we can talk. I will be in... The gleeman was shaking his head. A clean break is best, boy. If you're always coming around, even if you never mention it, I won't be able to get the horn out of my head, and I won't be tangled in it. I won't.
Oh, I always thought he gave him back the original flute, but you're right. It's just another flute.
Yeah, it's his second best.
Interesting. I never noticed that switch over. I always thought he had the same flute the whole time.
This reminds me of that whole thing. Those were my second best set of knives when he's killing Trollocs, and those were my third best set of knives. I imagine he uses his first best on the Myrddraal later.
Yeah. And that was actually another, when we're speaking of changes into different editions. Originally, it said that was my best set of knives.
Oh, really?
But then, because he later has power wrought knives that he fights the Myrddraal with, Jordan changed it to second best.
Okay, well, fair enough. I mean, he could have, been lying.
True. But I think that was another edit that happened at some point in the editions.
In the scene when he fights the Myrddraal in Whitebridge, there's blue flashes.
And those blue flashes, we only really see them when power wrought blades encounter Thakandar wrought blades.
They're the only power wrought knives we know of.
Go back and listen to that episode.
They've got to be around somewhere. After Rand left, Thom threw his cloak on the bed and sat with his elbows on the table. The Horn of Valir. How did that farm boy find... He shut off that line of thought. Old fool, he mutters to himself later. Aye, an old fool, Zara said from the door. He gave a start. He had been so absorbed in his thoughts that he had not heard the door open. He had known Zara for years, off and on in his wanderings, and she always took full advantage of the friendship to speak her mind. She accuses him of playing Daes Da'mar again.
Yeah. Well, Tom's always tempted by these stories. That was his temptation to go down to Ilion with the boys.
Yeah.
He really is like, man, not much tempts him, but what a story that would make.
She's like, what are you doing with this Andorran lord?
Yeah. And Tom's like, he's no lord. He's he has totally got this blind spot for the Game of Houses because he can't even think of Rand as a nobleman, because he thinks of him as this rural, farm boy shepherd that he, pulled out of the land, but everyone else sees him as a lord. And so Tom's sort of re-examining the whole encounter from that perspective and going, yeah, but I'm not involved in that anymore. It looks weird, but okay.
Yeah. The boy is a shepherd, Zara, from the Two Rivers. She laughs scornfully. And I'm the Queen of Galldrian. Nobody believes that Rand is a shepherd.
Gillidan?
Is it Gillidan?
Gillidan is what I would say.
There's no A after the L.
I think that's one that has
Gildan.
A couple of different pronunciations in the audiobook, depending on whether you're listening in the beginning or towards the end.
Gildan. And I'm the Queen of Gildan. I tell you, the game has grown dangerous in Cairhien the last few years. Nothing like what you knew in Camelin. There are murders done now. You'll have your throat cut for you if you don't watch out. I tell you, I am not in the great game any longer. That's all 20 years in the past, near enough. Aye. She did not sound out as if she believed it. But be that as may, and young outland lords aside, you've begun performing at lords' manors. They pay well, and they'll pull you into their plots as soon as they see how. They see a man and think how to use him, as naturally as breathing. This young lord of yours won't help you. They will eat him alive. I thought it was interesting that she says that to Thom, because then, of course, he starts playing the game for Rand, like right after this.
Well, only after Deanna's throat is slit.
Oh, that's
which
right.
She also warns him about. She says, their murder's done. You'll have your throat cut for you if you don't watch out. Well, he doesn't, but she does.
Yeah. He gave up on trying to convince her he was out of it. Is that what you came up here to say, Zara? Aye. Forget playing the great game, Thom. Marry Denna. She'll take you. The more fool her. Bony and white-haired as you are. Marry her and forget this young lord in Daes Da'mar. I thank you for the advice, he said dryly.
Well, and he doesn't even think he's involved. So he's like, well, it's already forgotten. Like, I already told him to go away. I never want to see him again. Like,
yeah.
It's this one meeting is all it takes to get him involved.
If you don't mind, Zara, I want to be alone for a while. I perform for Lady Aiel and her guests tonight, and I need to prepare. She gave him a snort and a shake of her head and banged the door shut behind her. Thom drummed his fingers on the table. Coat or no coat, Rand was still only a shepherd. If he had been what Thom once suspected, a man who could channel, neither Moraine nor any other Aes Sedai would have let him walk away ungentled. Horn or no horn, the boy was only a shepherd. He is out of it, he said aloud, and so am I.
Thom is wrong, and wrong. That's all I have to say about that last part.
Ah, the reluctant hero. This book is full of them.
He's not wrong often, but he definitely makes a few assumptions here that fool him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to be an Aes Sedai, Nynaeve.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a wolf, Perrin.
I don't want to be a king, Rand. I don't want to marry Rand, all three women.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?